A very warm welcome back to the program. You're still watching Smart 24 TV, and my name is Anthony. And of course, today I have two very interesting people here with me on set, and we're talking SMEs. But before we go into the discussion of SMEs, there's been a hot topic on the national debt, and very many people have been concerned about the national debt. Now, Mr. Julius's argument is the fact that if we can still invest in things that can actually give us returns, we can go ahead and borrow, because after all, even the biggest economies in the world are still depending on debt. Now, Dr. Faith, I would want to come on to you for the sake of course, balancing this discussion. The fact that Mr. Julius is saying that we can actually be able to borrow more, if at all we are investing in things that give us a return, is a good idea. But you're seeing that debt servicing is coming almost at the helm of our budget. We still take a huge amount of our revenue to finance debt and then borrow more money to still get to service the same debt, and also part of it to drive our economic growth. Don't you think it's a high time we also set our priorities right when it comes to our debt servicing, when it comes to our rate of borrowing and our debt appetite? Is it a right time for us to actually restructure some of our priorities?
Thank you so much. Previously, I have come to this show, and our discussion was still about what I think about the priorities in regard to debt. But I'm so glad that this evening I am here with a senior colleague who has not simplified the explanation around this debt, but has also tried to put it in context. So for me, I believe that where Uganda is, some of the things that must be considerations must be justifications other than sentiments of the debt is heavy. But one of the things, I mean, I will not agree any further with what my senior colleague has said, but one of the things that I wanted to emphasize further is the issue of if we borrow, where do we locate relevant skilling in the line of financing of these debts, where this debt allocation is going? As he's also ably put it, if we can only invest in enterprises that could actually help us to repay the debt with comfort, but also enable the economy to recover and not pay and not borrow anymore, then that should be the right way to go. But my argument is, how much of this debt ideally goes to the relevant skilling which we need as a country? Now, when I talk about relevant skilling, I am here trying to mean that if you, for example, saying that we need to have a hides farm in Karamoja area, the question is, what kind of capacity do we need to overturn the hides into skin wear, into all these kinds of wear that we need? Is this something we are considering? I think what has been very evident in our debt, and why many people are always interested in saying we don't feel that the debt borrowed is actually generating worthwhile for Uganda, is where we don't see a complete chain or a complete value chain. If you're taking a road, make sure that road is actually going to pick something of economic value. And if it's picking something of economic value, as you put it, recently I was having a discussion and digging deeper into reading about what is happening in Costa Rica. These people were able to transform their economy in the last couple of years, 30 years, out of debt, and they are one of the living testimonies the world will live to tell. Why? They looked at their economy holistically, not one element of we now go infrastructure. No, infrastructure is very good if it's coupled with the right labor, if it's coupled with the right financing enterprises, if it is coupled with the right political structures, if it's coupled with the right governance structures. So single-handedly looking at each of these items in terms of debt is what, for me, I believe brings about the contradictions and a lot of queries in terms of, are we borrowing right? Aren't we over-borrowing? Now, going back to the statement that you originally mentioned, that one of the gentlemen at the central bank had said, even if we had reached 51, it's actually 51.46%, actually 51.76% of debt to GDP. It is still not high if we have a 360 degrees on management of that debt. But if we fall short of that, then we are in a crisis. Now, what is my stand? Do I think that we are still out of the reach? No, we are not. All we need to make sure is that let every area function, and in that regard, we will be able to even pick more data and develop better. Because, I mean, in finance, one of the things we always allude to is, would I rather take 50 years to arrive at where I want to go alone than spend 5 years with a partner? And the partner are these debt partners that we have in this country who are willing to even give us the debt. So the idea is, can we put it to use, make it productive, create the right jobs? But how do we do that? Make sure all the areas around economic development are ably articulated in the process of this debt management.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Faith. Lastly, I'll come on to you, Mr. Julius, on the same topic. And we want to talk about the priorities of government. Yes, the debt can be sustained, and we can still borrow and invest in different segments of the economy. But us having debt servicing in the third position is kind of, it's kind of scary. Do you think we need also to restructure some of our priorities in as regards our budget so that we can be able to sustain our debt?
You see, in principle, the answer is yes. It is nonetheless not that simplistic. A yes, and then we are good to go. We need to scratch a little deeper and really check, and then we can have a logical conclusion. As Dr. Faith here has said, not based on sentiments and hearsay, street talk, and I'll give an example. And I repeat that Uganda's debt stock has increased. So has your school enrollment of primary school going children. The challenge nonetheless may be, if we have so much of enrollment at P1, primary 1, at the end of the season, by the time you are at P7, so many along the road have disappeared, and you can't even easily tell where they have disappeared to. That becomes a concern, because it means that ambition of you're investing in human resource development, in human capital development broadly, has perhaps not been or will not be achieved 100%, even perhaps 70%, if 70% of the children have disappeared along the way. Unfortunately, especially more so for the girl child. So that could be the debate. But that you borrow to increase your capacity of number of textbooks for your children to go to school is absolutely in order. That you have borrowed to have your stock of classrooms, your pit latrines and other types of toilets and for children, as enablers for children to go to school, is in order. If in 1962, at Uganda's independence, you had a patry 844 kilometers of what we call chorus of the tarmac road. As we speak today, even taking a sample of 2020, 2020, around the COVID lockdown time, when I last checked, we had excess of 6,000 kilometers tarmacked. That for the first time, you have a Kapchorwa, Quen, Swam, up Swam bridge, road being constructed to that higher level for you to be able to therefore pick the good wheat that is grown in the Sebe area of this country is absolutely in order. That under the East African Community Protocol, that you are linking, that road is an enabler for you to link into Kitale on the Kenyan side and if you went up on the Kapenguria side, to be able to take your matoke that comes from Bali, and for heaven's sake, your matoke can be found in the Kapenguria market, is in order. If you borrow, and we have Bioya Bianswa, as it has happened in some of the cases, that has a reason for for distress. So I think we need to look at, even in the case of debt, we need to look at a case-by-case basis, and then we are able to have a kind of a convincing conclusion. If you have borrowed, and in 2009-8, financial year 8-9, your literacy level of numeracy, people who can read, write, but also understand what they have written or read, was at 36% then. As we speak today in 2022, even if we say in 2021, you're at 77% of literacy of Uganda who can read a signpost, who can read that this medicine 1 times 3 means this is not necessarily synonymous with 2 times 2 in the growth of our children. Then for me, that's a plus. That type of borrowing that enables you to have an improved infrastructural network, to have more energy, to have which energy is going to be very, very fundamental in supporting the SMEs, which we are going to delve into much more, is in order. Because the borrowing, for instance, for you to refurbish, to renew, to give momentum to Uganda Development Bank, to offset a section of the borrowed revenues for supporting SMEs, which sober up, and the sobriety in their contribution that you highlighted when we were starting the discussion comes forth, comes to fruition, and that SME is being managed by a hitherto UPE child, where you are borrowing from the World Bank has enabled that child to read and write, where that the debt resources and many others have contributed to the expansion of the secondary school system in this country, where government, out of 10,594 parishes, if I took that as an example, it is the government now is just remaining with about 1,320 schools, government-aided primary schools in every parish in the country. Until 20 years ago, you were barely at 40,000, at 40% of the 10,594 we are talking about. So there has been progressive movement. Even then, if you talked about Costa Rica, as Faith highlighted earlier on, if you talked about Vietnam, where His Excellency, the President of Uganda, President Museveni, has visited, he's there for a 3-day state visit, and you see how they have been able to transform themselves much quicker. They have used their own resources prudently, but also used borrowed resources prudently. There has been a certain type of determined leadership, not just at the helm in form of the chief executive officer, who in this case is the president, but also everyone at their respective areas of responsibility, to know why we are Barcelona, and we are every player in our team is aiming at pushing into that same goalpost. So in terms of national development trajectory, if you look at our national development plan 3, we are on course. The challenge is, if there are other risks that may come in, like you highlighted earlier on, that may dismantle a bit of, or discomfort a bit of that course. If National Development Plan 3 is saying you must have a functional railway line, and the government has borrowed from the European Union to revamp the over 200 kilometers Kampala Maraba railway line, which personally I don't believe in. I believe in the standard gauge railway, not the other old century one. But in terms of financial muscle, use that same money to open up through Mbale, Tukumi, into the hinterland of Teso, get to Lira, link up with the industrial hub that is being established and is now functional in Gulu. And that can be used to serve the Sudan markets, to serve the DR market through Aru, for instance, through Arua, our current Arua, and then you cross to Aru market on the DRC side and have our products there. Pick that money I don't even want to whisper when I come to that one because the other guys are so listening. But take that money and bring it into your state coffers on the basis of having borrowed is in order. If you borrow and that doesn't happen, that causes a discount.
Yes. Wow, thank you very much for those wonderful insights. And thank you, Dr. Faith, as well, for giving us that insight. Now, we want to dive into now the topic here of SMEs. And I just want to, first of all, ask Dr. Faith to define for us to what extent can a business or an enterprise be or medium. And these big contributors, over 90% of the private sector, and directly linked to over 80% of manufactured output here in Uganda, they are very vital for our growth. How much do they contribute to our economy as Uganda? I'll start with you, Dr. Faith, on that one.
Okay. Thank you so much for the good program again.
Yeah.
But before we actually get into the SMEs, I know our intention this evening is actually to try and see how do we reboost, how do we contribute to the discussion of how do we build their resiliency, isn't it? And of course, in your introductory remarks, you already, in a way, alluded to what these SMEs are doing. They are contributing over 2.5 million jobs and above. That was actually as of 2020, not even COVID time, you can imagine. So to date, we are short of statistics, but we imagine it's something that is above. They are contributing over 90% of the private sector. And in Uganda, we always look at these SMEs more in terms of their capacity to employ, more in terms of their turnover. But in the recent past, I was having a discussion with some think tank that I belong to, and was saying in these SMEs, how do we segregate them, informals and the formals? Because even in those ones, we have those which are informal, but they're actually actively contributing. And then we have also those ones which are formal. So all these are still areas of debate. If you've taken some key interested in looking at what the International Labour Organization stipulates, they also don't actually get conclusive on what the context is like because of the varying changes of context. So even in Uganda, in agreement at the modern times, I can say there isn't a generic definition, but we try to characterize them around so that we can have something which we call a working definition. But ideally for me, I believe it's not sufficient, and that's what I will talk about. So every time we talk about these small medium enterprises, we are looking at those enterprises which are employing roughly 5 people and maximum of around 49 people. And ideally their total assets range between 10 million to 100 million. And of course, by the time they are operating in this circle, the assumption is that they are known. They are registered, they are known. Interestingly, a few weeks back, I was on this same spot with a gentleman from URA. And he gave out a very interesting statistic, which I took by the interest. And this statistic was that currently in Uganda, according to URA, they only have 1.6 registered tax identification numbers. Only 1.6. But yet, if you step out in the city, all the cities around, I think currently, are they 5 or 6 cities that were recently created? Out of that, go to up countrysides. Out of that, look at functional farms. We were alluding at picking on all that harvest that is happening out of the city in the rural areas. The question is, are these registered SMEs? When they have issues, do they also draw support from government? And of course the answer is yes. So that's why I say, because of the different angles of looking at this word SMEs, for us it might be very difficult to contextualize. But I believe that all of us know that these SMEs exist, and these are small, micro in nature. They are providing, of course, business services, and they are employing people between 5 and 49. Now, I wanted to not to miss this opportunity, and I take the members through what I feel that the discussion should go to as we continue in this topic. And this is in regard to their contribution. Very vital. Even though we have said they are informal and they are formal, they still contribute to employment, meaning that people are actually earning income from them. They are earning livelihood from them. And also in the events of shocks, in the events of recession, in the events of failed mechanics around the economy, they are hugely affected. And this has been very evident in what we see. So as we go through this discussion tonight, I wanted to draw also viewers to the issue of resiliency. Now, every time we experience issues around epidemics, and I mean this is one of the shock. Of course, we always define shocks as those elements in the economy that affect productivity and the ability of these SMEs to sustain their operations. And of course, when we talk about operations, even if the definition was around the labor, you could take it deeper. Can they continue to pay workers? Can they actually keep workers? In the last 3 or 4 years, it has been evident, and I'm taking keen interest in, for example, what is happening. All the businesses we knew, a couple of them have left the industry. And the question is why? Is it that their service is no longer relevant? Is it that their product is not relevant? Or they've actually been shed off because of their inability to stand the shocks? And I would like, when my colleague talks about shocks further, I would like him to explain more about these economic shocks, which are beyond, some of them beyond the muscle of these SMEs. And also on the other hand, when we talk about shocks, as I mentioned, they can be economic, but they can also be political in nature. They can be wars. A quick history into Uganda's economy. Uganda is one of those youngest economies that you can ever think about. Less than 100 years old. But every time we talk about the economy of Uganda, it's a shocker that over the last 60 years of independence, Uganda has had more than 15 shocks. They are either political, they are economic, they are social, they are infrastructure, and all these come and hit so hard the SMEs. And because of that, the SMEs, some of them close, some of them shrink, some of them disappear. Now the idea is, in all that they have been able to experience, and the fact that they directly affect each of us, so I want to bring it to the layman's understanding that when you think about the SME, think about that standard supermarket around you, think about that standard market around you, think about that standard health facility around you, and many more. And you ask yourself, if it was operating last year for over 2 or 3 years or 5 years, why has it just all of a sudden condensed? So how can we boost their ability that when they are hit with these shocks, they can actually be able to bounce back? In the recent past, the shocks have been around the epidemics. It is from COVID to Ebola. Now, as of last night, we are back to COVID. So we can't predict what more is coming. So for how long will the people suffer the effects of these shocks? So how do we reboost these SMEs so that when they are hit by these shocks, they can bounce back even stronger?
Yes.
Thank
you very much, Dr. Faith, there, and for setting the motion, of course, now for us there. Now, we're going to take another quick break, but when we return, and I'll start still with you, Dr. Faith, before going to Mr. Julius, on some of the shocks we are facing currently. You've mentioned some here as being the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are also seeing interest rates going up every now and then. Inflation is at now 2 digits, at 10%, above 10%. And the central bank rate is escalating the rates every now and then. And all this comes back to the private sector, which is basically the SMEs. And so we want to talk about how we can rise out of this mud and still have our SMEs on top. And we'll also talk about the fact of our SMEs rising and falling at the same rate. We have some of the biggest and quickest startups, but also some of the biggest and quickest failures. They fail as soon as they start. We are watching, of course, Smart24 TV, and we're talking SMEs and how we can remain resilient in the tough economic times. My name is Anthony. We are taking a quick breather and we'll be right back. Stay with us.